My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a nurse. For years, I lived paycheck to paycheck, working long shifts, picking up every extra hour I could, and cutting corners on everything from groceries to vacations. While my friends were going out, I was packing lunches and skipping trips. I wanted one thing more than anything else: a home of my own. After nearly a decade of hard work and discipline, I finally bought my apartment, worth $300,000. Signing those papers was one of the proudest moments of my life. My family never really took me seriously. Growing up, I was always the quiet one, the one they teased for being too sensitive or too boring. My older brother Jason was the golden child who could do no wrong, and my younger sister Amber was the spoiled one who always got her way. My parents, Frank and Margaret, doted on them and treated me like I should just go along with whatever the family wanted. I learned to keep my head down and stay out of their drama. But everything changed the moment I bought my apartment. Suddenly, the same family that used to laugh at me started praising me. My mom told people how responsible I was. Jason and Amber acted proud of me for the first time in my life. They complimented the place, said I did well for myself, and for a moment, I believed it. I thought maybe things were different now. Maybe I had finally earned their respect. I let myself feel good about it. I let myself think, just for a while, that I had turned a corner with them. But what I didn't realize was that their smiles and compliments weren't pride. They weren't happy for me. They were planning. They were calculating. Looking back now, the little things make sense. Jason asking questions about my mortgage. Amber joking that I had too much space for one person. My mom casually mentioning how Jason's family was struggling with rent. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking they were just making conversation. But in reality, they were planting seeds, softening me up for what they were about to ask. When the day came, they invited me to what they called a family meeting. I thought it was going to be about my parents, maybe health issues or something serious. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush. That was the day everything changed. That was the day I realized my family wasn't proud of me at all. They wanted to take what I had worked so hard for. And when I said no, they showed me exactly how little I meant to them. When I showed up at my parents' house for the so-called family meeting, I didn't think much of it. They greeted me with wide smiles, pulling me in with hugs that felt just a little too staged. My mom, Margaret, fussed over my hair like she always did when she was trying to butter me up. My dad, Frank, patted my shoulder and told me how glad he was that I came. Jason and Amber were sitting at the dining table, laughing as if nothing in the world could be wrong. For a moment, it almost felt normal, like maybe we were just going to share dinner together. But as soon as I sat down, the energy shifted. My dad cleared his throat, my mom folded her hands, and Jason leaned forward like he was about to pitch me a business idea. That's when they laid it out. They said Jason's family needed stability, that renting wasn't sustainable, and that it only made sense for me to transfer the apartment into his name. They dressed it up as though it was some logical solution, even throwing in words like fair and family responsibility. I sat there frozen, barely able to believe what I was hearing. My mom chimed in, saying it wasn't like I'd be left with nothing. I could always stay in one of their guest rooms if I needed to. My dad nodded like this was a reasonable compromise. Jason kept pushing, saying his kids needed the space more than I did. Then Amber jumped in, her voice sharp, accusing me of being selfish for holding on to something bigger than I needed. The air in the room grew heavy. My hands clenched under the table, and I told them no. The word came out shaky but firm. I said I had worked for that apartment, and it wasn't up for discussion. That's when the smiles completely disappeared. My mom's face hardened, my dad muttered something under his breath, and Amber rolled her eyes so dramatically it made me want to scream. Jason's voice rose, loud and angry. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. He called me ungrateful, said I didn't understand what family meant. I pushed back, refusing again, and that's when it happened. His hand shot toward the cake my mom had placed in the middle of the table. He grabbed a slice, stood up, and shoved it right into my face. The frosting smeared across my cheek, the crumbs fell into my lap, and for a second the shock paralyzed me. I looked up at them, expecting anyone, to step in. Instead, Amber burst out laughing. My mom gave a little smirk. Even my dad chuckled under his breath. Their eyes weren't on me like I was family anymore. They looked at me like I was a joke, a problem they had every right to mock. That was the moment something inside me broke. I walked out of that house with my face burning and my clothes stained, holding back the urge to scream. The laughter echoing behind me followed me all the way to my car. By the time I shut the door, the tears came fast, blurring the road as I drove home. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not just from embarrassment, but from the sharp sting of betrayal that wouldn't let go. Back in my apartment, I sat on the couch in silence, cake still crusted on my shirt. Their words replayed in my head, each one cutting deeper than the last. Jason's voice telling me I didn't deserve what I had. Amber sneering that I'd never even have a family to fill the place. My mother agreeing like it was fact. My father nodding as if the decision had already been made. Over and over, those sentences looped until I could barely breathe. The apartment that had once felt like my safe place suddenly felt different. I looked around at the walls, the furniture I had chosen, the view from the balcony. All I could think about was how my family didn't see any of it as mine. They saw it as theirs, waiting to be taken. In their eyes, I wasn't their daughter or their sister anymore. I was a resource, a means to make their lives easier, a target with a dollar sign attached. That realization hit harder than the cake in my face. I wasn't loved. I was useful, and only as long as I had something they wanted. The ache in my chest was unlike anything I'd felt before. I had grown up thinking family meant loyalty, but the people who raised me had just shown me that loyalty was conditional. I wanted to storm back there, to scream at them for treating me like dirt, to throw their cruelty right back at them. My fists itched for confrontation. My voice wanted to explode. But something inside me whispered to wait. Anger would only feed them. A fight in the open would only give them more power. So I sat quietly in the dim light of my apartment, staring at the crumbs still stuck to my sleeve, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to defend myself. I was going to watch. I was going to listen. I was going to pay attention to every word, every move, every little scheme they thought they could pull off. They had shown me who they were, and I wasn't going to forget it. From that night forward, my silence wouldn't mean surrender. It would mean planning. A few days later, I stopped by a neighborhood store to pick up some things after a long shift. I wasn't expecting to run into anyone I knew, but as I walked past the cleaning aisle, I heard a voice that froze me in place. Amber. She was standing near the end of the row with our cousin Rachel, speaking in that hushed but animated tone she used when gossiping. I should have kept moving, but something in me told me to stay quiet. I leaned closer, pretending to study a bottle of detergent, my heart pounding harder with each word that floated over. Amber was bragging. She said the family had a plan to make sure I handed over the apartment no matter what. She mentioned talking to a lawyer, seeing if there was a way to argue that it should be considered part of family property. She laughed as she described how easy it would be to guilt me into signing, maybe by making me believe my parents were in financial trouble. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. She joked that if that didn't work, they could always invent some story about me owing money, something to pressure me into doing the right thing. Rachel asked if I would really fall for it, and Amber's answer burned into my memory. Emily's too soft. She caves when people push hard enough. I stood frozen, gripping the detergent bottle like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The truth settled in sharp and cold. They hadn't just lashed out in a moment of anger at that dinner. They'd been plotting this for months. The smiles, the questions, the sudden warmth when I first bought the apartment, it had all been part of a setup. My chest tightened as I realized the people I grew up with weren't simply being selfish. They were predators circling what they thought was easy prey. And in their minds, I was still the weak one, the quiet one who would fold under pressure. But standing there in that aisle, I felt something shift inside me. The tears I had cried, the humiliation I had endured, the ache of hearing their insults, all of it hardened into something sharper. They thought I was fragile, but they were wrong. I walked out of that store with my head high, my bag heavier than usual, not because of the groceries, but because of what I now carried with me. Knowledge, proof that they had underestimated me. They saw me as someone they could manipulate, someone they could control. What they didn't know was that their plotting had given me clarity. I wasn't just going to keep what was mine. I was going to show them exactly how dangerous it was to treat me like a fool. I didn't wait long after what I overheard in that store. That night, I sat on my couch with the phone in my hand, typing and deleting the same message over and over until finally I stopped second-guessing myself. I kept it short, no excuses, no explanations, just the truth. I told them I would not be attending family events anymore. That was it. No room for argument. No opening for negotiation. It didn't take long for my phone to light up. First came Amber, firing off paragraphs filled with accusations, saying I was acting dramatic, claiming I was breaking the family apart over something small. Jason followed, his words sharper, accusing me of betrayal, saying I was destroying relationships that had stood for decades. My mother's messages were sprinkled in, full of guilt-laced phrases about how she raised me better, how this wasn't how a daughter should behave. Then the call started. My father's number lit up the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered once. His voice was calm at first, but beneath it I could hear the same pressure I'd known all my life. He told me I was selfish, that family meant sacrifice, and then came the line that cut through me like a blade. If you loved us, you'd do this one thing for us. I didn't reply. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. The buzzing didn't stop. Texts kept coming, notifications stacked on top of each other, but I refused to give them the response they wanted. I let the silence speak for me. Hours turned into days, and still the messages didn't slow down. Some were angry, others pitiful. One moment I was heartless, the next I was begged to reconsider. It was a cycle, shifting tones like they were trying every trick in the book to break me down. But I didn't bite. I didn't type a single word back. The silence unsettled them more than anything I could have said. I could feel it through the desperate tone of their last messages, the way they started asking why I wasn't answering, why I was shutting them out. For once, the control wasn't in their hands, it was in mine. I knew this wasn't the end. People like them didn't just give up when they wanted something. But as I sat in my quiet apartment, my phone buzzing endlessly in the background, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Power. I decided that if my family wanted to see me as nothing more than a resource, then I would stop being one. The first test came quickly. Amber called, sounding casual, asking if I could watch her kids, just for a couple of hours. In the past, I always said yes. I rearranged shifts, skipped plans, and showed up without hesitation. This time, I didn't even pause. I told her I couldn't help and hung up before she could argue. The silence on the other end told me she hadn't expected that answer. Not long after, I opened a folder where I kept records of money I had loaned Jason over. It wasn't a small amount. He had always promised to pay me back, and I had agreed to a slow, manageable plan because I didn't want to cause waves. That night, I wrote a formal message telling him the arrangement was over. I wanted the full balance returned, and I wanted it soon. I kept my words plain, not angry, not emotional, just direct. The reaction was immediate. Jason tried to stall, claiming he didn't have it, saying he needed more time. I didn't budge. Every excuse he gave, I cut down with one line. He had taken it, now he had to return it. Eventually, his messages turned bitter, but I didn't reply. Soon, I began to notice something. Other relatives started calling, not to lecture me this time, but to ask questions. My aunt mentioned Jason had been hinting at financial trouble. A cousin asked why Amber seemed so stressed and short-tempered. The whispers spread on their own, carried by people who didn't know the full story, but could sense something wasn't right. And through it all, I stayed calm. I didn't explain, didn't complain, didn't expose the details of what they had done to me. Whenever someone asked directly, I smiled and said I was fine. That was all it took. Without me fueling the fire, their own behavior spoke louder than anything I could have said. The more desperate they appeared, the more others started to wonder. For the first time, I wasn't the one on defense. I wasn't scrambling to justify myself or prove my worth. I was steady, watching from a distance as cracks began to show in the image my brother and sister tried so hard to maintain. It wasn't revenge in the loud, dramatic way people imagine. It was quiet, subtle, and far more effective. By taking back the favors and money they had relied on, I forced them to stand on their own. And as their struggles became harder to hide, I didn't have to lift a finger to make them look bad. It was a Saturday afternoon when the knock came at my door, loud and sharp, not the kind of knock you expect from someone visiting politely. I checked the monitor first, and there he was, Jason, standing outside with his wife, Claire. His posture was stiff, his jaw set, the kind of stance he used when he wanted to scare someone into giving in. Claire looked less certain, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, glancing around the hallway like she already regretted being there. I didn't open the door right away. Instead, I spoke through the intercom, asking what he wanted. Jason's voice carried the same command he had used at that family meeting. He said he was there for the keys, that it was time I stopped dragging things out. His tone made it sound like the matter was already settled, like I was just delaying the inevitable. What he didn't know was that I had taken precautions after that night. The locks had been changed, every entry secured. Small cameras now watched over my hallway and living room, recording everything. I wasn't about to let anyone walk in and corner me. When I refused to open up, Jason's patience snapped. He banged on the door harder, shouting that I was being unreasonable. Claire tried to calm him, telling him this wasn't the way, but he brushed her off. I warned him once, if he didn't leave, I'd involve the authorities. He didn't believe me, so I picked up the phone and dialed. My voice was steady as I gave the address, and explained there were people refusing to leave my property. While I waited, Jason kept up his pounding, his words growing harsher. Claire's face turned pale as she realized I wasn't bluffing. By the time the officers arrived, the tension was thick enough to choke on. The scene that followed was almost surreal. Jason tried to explain himself, painting me as the stubborn sibling causing unnecessary problems. But the officers weren't interested in family squabbles. They were interested in the simple fact that he was outside my door, making demands, refusing to leave after being told to. They spoke firmly, ordering him to step back and calm down. Claire's composure cracked then. She pulled him aside, hissing that she never signed up for them. I caught fragments of her voice, angry, embarrassed, telling him he had dragged her into his sister's drama and made them both look ridiculous. Jason's face reddened, his pride deflating as the officers stood by, waiting for him to back down. When they finally left, escorted down the hallway, I watched through the camera feed as Claire stormed ahead of him, not bothering to wait. Jason trailed behind, shoulders hunched, no trace of the confidence he had carried when he first arrived. That day, it wasn't me who looked weak. It was him, exposed in front of his own wife, his intimidation turned against him. Not long after Jason's stunt at my apartment, the ripple effects began to show elsewhere. I didn't need to lift a finger. Things were unraveling on their own. Amber's life cracked first. Her husband, Mark, stumbled across bank records that didn't add up. Money that should have been there was gone. He confronted her, and the truth spilled out. She had dipped into their savings, gambling on a plan that was supposed to pay off once she secured a place to live in my apartment. She had counted on moving in soon, assuming I'd fold under pressure, and had already started spending as if it were guaranteed. When Mark realized she had gambled their future on a fantasy, his anger boiled over. Their arguments grew louder, spilling into the ears of neighbors and family alike. At the same time, whispers about my parents began circulating in their social circle. Friends they'd bragged to about their responsible daughter were now hearing a different story. Word reached them that Margaret and Frank had tried to corner me into signing away my property. At first, my parents brushed it off as exaggeration, but reputations don't mend easily once cracks form. Invitations dried up. Old friends stopped calling. The warm greetings they used to enjoy at church turned into awkward nods and sideways glances. I heard pieces of it secondhand, cousins passing along what they'd overheard, relatives hinting that my parents' behavior had become the subject of hushed conversations. My family had always projected an image of unity, presenting themselves as close-knit, respectable, dependable. That image was dissolving fast. Jason's humiliation still lingered after the incident at my door, and Claire's resentment only deepened as gossip spread. Amber was drowning in her own mess with Mark. My parents were facing social fallout they didn't know how to fix. The fortress they had built around themselves, the one where appearances mattered more than anything else, was crumbling stone by stone, all because their greed had been dragged into the light. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they had treated me as the weak one, the quiet one, the disposable one. Yet here I was, steady in my own home, untouched by the chaos they had unleashed on themselves. I didn't have to shout, accuse, or expose them. They had exposed themselves. From the outside, it probably looked like their downfall was sudden, but I knew better. It had been building for months, maybe years. The difference now was that people were finally seeing them for who they really were. And instead of standing together as they once had, they were turning on each other, desperate to escape the consequence. Their unity had always been a performance. Now the curtain had dropped, and the audience wasn't applauding. The storm around my family only seemed to grow, but inside my own walls, life began to feel calm again. For the first time in months, I could breathe without waiting for the next demand or confrontation. My apartment returned to being what I had always wanted it to be, a place that was mine, untouched, steady. I filled it with small comforts, plants on the windowsill, the smell of coffee in the morning, quiet evenings without interruptions. Work, once just exhausting, started to bring me joy. My co-workers, who had always been polite, began to feel like something more. I accepted invitations I used to turn down, lunch breaks that turned into dinners, casual chats that grew into friendships. Slowly, I realized I was building a circle of people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. It wasn't family by blood, but it felt stronger than that. Meanwhile, the stories about my siblings reached me in fragments, each one painting a clearer picture of their unraveling. Jason's temper, once tolerated at his job, became too much. Constant outbursts and arguments pushed his boss past the limit. Word spread that he had been let go, and instead of fixing things, he doubled down on his bitterness. His pride, already dented, couldn't withstand the blow of losing his livelihood. Amber's world cracked open in another way. Mark, done with her secret spending and the lies that came with it, packed his bags. Their separation wasn't quiet. It was loud, messy, and public. She tried to mask it with bravado, pretending she didn't care, but those close to her saw the truth. The same cousin who had once laughed with her in the store later told me Amber looked hollow, weighed down by choices she couldn't undo. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. Watching from a distance, I felt nothing but clarity. Their downfall wasn't mine to celebrate. It was theirs to own. What mattered was that their chaos no longer touched me. At night, I'd sit on my balcony with a cup of tea, the city lights stretching out in front of me. There was a time I would have replayed every word they'd thrown at me, wondered if I was wrong for standing my ground. But not anymore. The silence of my phone, the peace in my home, the laughter I now shared with people who genuinely cared. Those were reminders that I had finally cut the strings they once used to pull me around. I was no longer their target, their scapegoat, or their fallback plan. I was free. Months passed with an ease I hadn't known in years. My days flowed without intrusion, and the peace I had carved out for myself became normal. Then one afternoon, I came home to find an envelope slipped under my door. My name was written across the front in my mother's handwriting, neat and careful, the same script she used for birthday cards when I was a child. For a moment, I hesitated. A part of me hoped it might finally be an apology, an acknowledgement of the damage they had done. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope resting in my hands longer than I intended. When I finally tore it open, the words inside hit me harder than any silence ever could. My mother's voice poured off the page, pleading for forgiveness, painting a picture of a family that could be whole again. But between the lines of affection came the familiar sting. She asked me, almost casually, to reconsider, helping Jason by passing along the apartment. That single line stripped away everything else the letter tried to dress up. It wasn't about healing. It wasn't about me. It was the same demand in a softer package. Even after everything, the humiliation, the pressure, the distance, they still saw me as the answer to their problem, not as a person who deserved respect. I leaned back in my chair, the paper trembling between my fingers, and an unexpected laugh escaped my throat. It wasn't joyful. It wasn't warm. It was sharp, bitter, the sound of someone who had finally run out of illusion. They hadn't changed. They never would. Without hesitation, I folded the letter back up, dropped it in the trash, and let the lid fall shut. That was where it belonged, out of sight, out of reach, with no power left over me. I walked to the balcony and slid the door open. The cool air brushed against my face as I stepped outside, the city stretching wide beneath me. The hum of traffic, the glow of streetlights, the distant sound of laughter. It all felt alive in a way my family never had. I wrapped my arms around myself, not out of loneliness, but out of certainty. Looking out at the skyline, I whispered the words that had been forming in me for months, words that sealed everything once and for all. My apartment, my life, my rule. I stayed there a long time, leaning on the railing, steady and unshaken. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of their demands, their guilt, their chaos. I wasn't waiting for another blow to come. I was standing in my own space, untouched, untouchable, exactly where I belonged. That was my ending and my beginning. Do you think I was right to walk away from my family, or should I have given them another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.